Welcome everybody. Thank you for joining us this afternoon at the closing session. This year's Data Science Research Bazaar is focused on data and communities. Throughout February, we've heard a variety of presentations focused on this theme, with a particular emphasis on sharing and protecting data. The purpose of this closing session is to provide an opportunity to pull together what we've discussed and learned at this year's Research Bazaar and think about how we as a community of data scientists can transform the ideas we've heard into action. We opened the Research Bazaar with examples of communities taking action with data for public benefit. We heard from Malia Jones, Associate Scientist in Health Geography at the UW-Madison Applied Population Laboratory and co-founder of Dear Pandemic, a collaborative project with experts in the fields of healthcare, economics, and sociology who work together to distill public health data in a way that it can be widely understood through social media, videos, blog posts, and a newsletter. Dear Pandemic was created to address what the group called a huge gap between the overwhelming amount of science information coming out of the needs of everyday people to interpret and put this information to use in their daily lives. The accessible and interactive platforms that Dear Pandemic uses allows its audience to easily share credible information and fosters an educated and empowered community around science and public health topics. Data has the power to bring people together around a shared goal. We've invited our panelists representing citizen science, university administration, and faculty to talk about their work and share their thoughts about communities interacting with data. We're grateful to have our panelists with us today to share their insights. So I would like to begin our panel discussion by calling on each of our panelists, and if they could all take about 2 minutes to briefly introduce themselves. And as part of that introduction, please answer the question, what is your perspective on the relationship between data and communities? So to kick that off, I'd like to just pass it over to Aaron Brower, if you would like to introduce yourself.
Thanks, Ian, and thanks for having me here, and nice to see folks. And I even recognize a few who I haven't seen in quite some time. Michael and Brian, I'm looking at you. Yeah, so thanks for the chance to talk with you. Let me describe a little bit about what I do and then the role that data plays in it. I am the executive director for UW Extended Campus. That's a UW system organization, and what we do is partner with all the campuses, Madison included, basically to run online programming for adults and professionals. Technology generally, data specifically, is part of just endemic to what we do. It's just absolutely central to everything we do. And I think maybe the perspective I can bring to this is my goal is that no one ever has to think about the technology or the data behind it. We have a completely seamless user experience that always works and just does exactly what you want it to do without having to work very hard at it. So that's sort of one piece just to kind of put on the table. Another is that that rarely happens, and even in the run-up to our presentation today, Nancy was kind of futzing with how to make the presentation work. And it's always ironic to me that, in my own world, having technology be such a central part of what we do, we're so reliant on technology. And when it doesn't work, God, it's terrible. The whole thing crashes, right? And technology is not universally accessible and high-speed internet and all that to all of the population that we serve. So maybe the last thing, and then I know we'll talk about more of this stuff later. Data itself becomes, in terms of community, data is the vehicle for how we talk to each other. So what's super important in online education is the outcomes of education more so than the inputs. The question of how do we know if students have actually learned something, that is the primary question that we're always trying to address. And data is the vehicle, is the way in which we talk about that. So collecting the right data, being able to access the data, communicate that easily to the partners that we work with, to students themselves so they know where they are as they're tracking through their programs. But it's really turning this question from, do I know if I'm teaching well, to do I know if students are actually learning something? And I should have mentioned that I spent 25 years on the Madison campus as a faculty member and researcher, and still have a tenure home there too. And kind of coming to the question of how do I know my students are actually learning was a bit of a revelation for me, versus am I teaching well? So anyway, the data itself is really a vehicle for the communication, and it's just central to what we do. Thanks.
Thank you, Aaron. I'd now like to ask Kaiping to introduce herself and answer the same question. Thank you.
Yeah, hi everyone, I'm Kaiping. It's great to see everyone here. And I am currently an assistant professor in Department of Life Sciences Communication here. And in my work, I am a social scientist. I'm a communication scholar, but my work is at the intersection of communication and computer sciences. So when I kind of like what I want to share today, about the relationship, how we think about data and communities, I have kind of like two things I emphasize a lot in my work. So the first is a critical perspective to understand this relationship. And a lot of my work is to show how digital technology like social media, how do they empower community voices while at the same time exclude certain community voices in participating in science and environment discussion. So this is where like I want to kind of like, when I, share a lot of my thoughts, it's we want to kind of have this kind of like, love and hate relationship between what data, what digital technology overall can empower and exclude communities. So this is like the first critical perspective I always use to think about the relationship. And the second thing, I want to kind of brought up here is when we think about data and communities, it's not just these two entities. It is under the bigger context of political culture context. So this is where a lot of my work, I look not just in terms of how people use this data, community uses data, in United States, but I look at China, I look at Ghana, because I think we want to understand the political social values behind the communities in order to understand this kind of love and hate relationship of how data can empower or sometimes disempower communities. So these are the kind of the two things I would love to discuss with you guys today. Look forward. Thank you.
Fantastic. Thank you, Kaiping. And next we have Eric Hoyt.
Yes, hi, thanks for having me. I'm Eric Hoyt. I'm a professor in the Communication Arts Department. My teaching and research involves media production, the study of film and broadcasting history, and digital humanities. I'm also the director of the Wisconsin Center for Film and Theater Research, our major AV archive on campus. And I also direct the Media History Digital Library, which has digitized now 3 million pages of old movie and broadcasting magazines for open access. And that's where a lot of my own experience when it comes to data and communities stems from, is doing cultural heritage and humanities oriented work, trying to make things digitally accessible, but also trying to do it in a thoughtful and respectful way when it comes to different communities. And I appreciate what you just brought up, Kaiping, about thinking of different cultural contexts and how important those are, because we've really been working on diversifying our collections and also globalizing our collections. But in doing that, really trying to pay attention and be thoughtful so we don't do it in a way that kind of replicates old traditions in the West of swooping in and grabbing artifacts, in this case scanning them, but and then only sharing them with our own communities and not really listening or giving back to the communities that we're collaborating with. So glad to be here. Thank you.
That's great. Thank you, Eric. And last on the list of panelists today, Nancy Sheehan.
Well, good afternoon, everyone. I am Nancy Sheehan, and I didn't know I would have to introduce myself. It's always a little bit of a longer story, but I have a background, an interdisciplinary background. I have both social science and sciences, natural sciences. I have I've been committed to participatory research and citizen science for many years now. Currently, I manage a citizen science program called Journey North at the UW-Madison Arboretum. My tenure at UW recently just started in 2018. Before that, I was pursuing my doctoral research in the Land Tenure Center. And I come to this from the perspective of both committed to volunteer engagement, participatory research, and citizen science. So I was really excited to answer this question about my perspective on the relationship between data and communities. It really is one shaped by my experience being a citizen scientist and managing various citizen science projects, both at the UW and for various nonprofit organizations. And I think, citizen science for me has been, including Journey North, has two goals: the collection of scientific data and the engagement of individuals and communities in science. It's all about public participation in research and scientific endeavors. And it really creates a bridge between data and community. So I would describe my perspective on the relationship between data and communities as really aspirational because of my experience with community science. Citizen science can be transformative, both for the people who participate, so the lay people, the non-paid scientists, the volunteers out there. And I have experienced this myself as a volunteer and now as program managers for various projects that, I have stood in streams across Wisconsin, monitoring water quality. And it opened up a whole world, a water world to me as a volunteer citizen scientist. Later, now working for Journey North and previously for a water quality monitoring program, I see this transformation every day with my volunteers. They are in awe of perhaps a migratory species floating by, and they want to share that exuberance and that beauty. And then they submit, for example, to Journey North that observational record, and then they become hooked. They learn more about, for example, monarch biology or hummingbird migration information. And then they move from there to be really ambassadors for migratory species or water quality. What that means varies from person to person, but they engage in their backyard, producing, putting in pollinator gardens, or they expand to more regional efforts. And the same could be said for the various research and scientists I've been involved with over the years, who, because of their work on citizen science projects, and they're sitting at the same table with lay people, they start seeing the world in a different way. They expand their research to ask questions that they may not have considered previously. And so both sides, the lay people involved, the participants in citizen science, and the paid scientists are transformed. And so that's really, and maybe I'll share this when I go to share my screen so I don't take up too much time right now. For me, citizen science is about creating more relationships between data and the communities. Our citizen scientists become heroes for the future and hope for the future. And it's all about kind of democratizing the scientific endeavor. So very excited to have this discussion and be a part of this community.
Fantastic. Thank you, Nancy. Okay, so thanks again to all of the panelists for joining us. I'm very excited for the beginning of this Q&A session now. I'll just quickly explain how the Q&A will work and then we can move into it. So we're going to start with a set of predefined questions for our panelists who will each have 8 minutes to respond. And then we'll follow that up with a Q&A from the audience. So please type your questions for the panelists into the chat anytime during the session, and we will ask as many of them as we can fit into the time allotted for the session. So predefined questions first, then open Q&A, ask your question in the chat anytime, and then we'll ask those questions for you as time allows. So our first question then is for Nancy Sheehan. Citizen science initiatives offer exciting ways for lay people to engage with data collection while exploring their communities, but there are often obstacles around maintaining the community support needed to collect meaningful data. What are some positive ways of encouraging participation long-term for continued community growth and engagement and ensuring the data set you're working towards is robust and accurate?
I'll unmute myself and I'll share my screen. Seeing my screen?
Yes, that looks good.
Good, great. I was called out by Aaron, so I want to make sure I can see this time. So just to segue from my answer to the first question, this is really where I think my take is on that we're all in the same boat, that there are more heads to these, for me, intractable environmental issues that we face, the better. And so for me, citizen science is all about science as a co-created enterprise. So this was the question. It's quite a long one. I was very excited to carve out a little bit of time to try to answer this in short 8 minutes. So I'm going to take the first part because I think that there's some important pieces to the terms we use even in this particular question. And I heard some of the other panelists kind of hit on some of this in their own intros, is really what the obstacles are, not only just in maintaining, but first opening the door for more individuals and communities to engage, and in my case, in citizen science initiatives. So just a quick kind of overview of citizen science. The field is burgeoning. There are about 2,000 projects and counting. They range from history, literature, to physics, astronomy, to biology. You name it, there's probably a citizen science project out there for you. There are over 1 million participants, and that's probably undercounting. I have really been impressed by, in my own little microcosm, when you ask people to participate, they are more than willing to help out in this big project we call science. There are many different roles that people can play in citizen science projects, from identifying research questions, collecting data, analyzing and interpreting results, making new discoveries, developing technologies and applications. But here's where I want to kind of stop for a moment, because right now, the citizen science field, we're really at an inflection point, a point where we're doing a lot of self-examination of the terms that we're using. And even the word, for example, citizen science, which we're using today, can be exclusionary to some people. And now we're really trying to define what we mean, have these kind of conversations that we're even having today, because we know from our colleagues that the word citizen can be seen as more of a legal term and can be exclusionary. Even community, the word community, there are people who feel themselves part of a community and people who feel themselves excluded from the community. So it's really a time to think about what terms we're using, and then asking some hard questions, especially those of us who manage these types of projects, to be as transparent as possible in defining what these terms mean, because they don't mean the same thing to everybody. So, some of the key questions that I'm grappling with my colleagues is, who determines the research questions, who can participate, who is actually participating, what barriers exist to participation, who is determining the roles. We went through those roles, identifying research to analyzing results, and how are the results shared with who. So again, this is a huge, big topic right now, and has been for quite some time. This is just a quick and dirty framework for those of you thinking about citizen science, is that citizen science is not just uniform, every project is the same. This is just one framework I have used in the past to try to amplify or explore some of the ways that each project might be different. So there are contributory citizen science projects where members of the public are invited by scientists to collect and contribute data. There are collaborative citizen science projects where members of the public assist scientists in developing a study and collecting and analyzing data for a shared goal. There's co-created citizen science projects where the public actually develops a study and then works with and invites the scientists to address questions that they themselves generated. So you might hear citizen science and community science used interchangeably, but that's all part of what we need to explore more, because there may not be actually interchangeably, and really be examining some of those questions that I asked, like who is asking those research questions, and where is the results, return of results going? Who benefits from the research project? So that's a quick and dirty on that one. So I'll get into a little bit of the nuts and bolts of the second part of this question, that really is about how do we encourage long-term participation of individuals and communities, and how do we ensure data quality? So I have these two slides here that are basically a toolbox that I have found to be particularly helpful in the citizen science field. So the first one is clearly articulating a mission and a vision and your values. So many community members, volunteers, lay people who have been involved in citizen science projects that I am most familiar with really feel that they want to be part of something larger than just themselves. So having a vision and mission statement provide a compass for people to actually feel that they're part of something bigger. Citizen science, as a program manager, we need to make sure that the roles and responsibilities of our volunteers are clearly articulated. People come to citizen science projects wanting to do a good job. They want to contribute actionable data. So it's part of our job as program managers to make sure that our methods are clearly articulated, and that we have multiple support channels available to answer questions and to provide training and to really support the good work of the citizen scientists, the volunteers involved. And especially for a program operating at such a large scale that Journey North does. So Journey North is a citizen science program that tracks migratory species across North America. We can't be everywhere. I can't be everywhere at every time. I really rely on strategic partners across North America. Then shifting perhaps more to the data quality side, although the two are very much related to me, because I have found, and this was part of my lightning talk that I gave, that it's part of an ethical obligation that at least many of those of us working in the citizen science field, to share data back to those who have contributed data. So that's where this return of results. How are we having a clear plan for how we're sharing results with the community writ large is really important to have in place. Crediting the volunteer efforts is really important. How if the data is used, how volunteers should be acknowledged, that effort should be acknowledged. Data privacy, we're all living in a world where it seems like our information is everywhere. So really having a clear policy on how we protect privacy is important. And being good stewards of the data that is submitted is also really critical. And as Aaron mentioned, having an infrastructure that is seamless. So, a website that is user-friendly, that is mobile-friendly, that especially in the world that I live in, where people are making observations in the field, out in nature, having and in places in rural America, in Canada, and in Mexico, where internet access is difficult, thinking deeply about how we can build these infrastructures that makes participation seamless and accessible to more and more people. So I'm not sure how I'm doing on time, but I was going to share Journey North just to put some context here. I started managing Journey North in 2018. It was a nonprofit for 25 years before being acquired by the Arboretum. I've spent since 2018 clearly articulating our vision and our mission. We now have methods written up in various different forms, recognizing that people receive information in different ways. Some people like to read, some people like to hear, some people like to have face-to-face. So we have multiple channels where we communicate, and we have a helpline. So I have a part-time person who works on the helpline, all to support the good work that our citizen scientists are providing us. On the return of results side, this is something that I'm very proud of for Journey North. When volunteers submit data, their data is immediately available for them to see and for the public to see. So we have various interactive maps. We also produce weekly migration stories where we integrate the actual data that the volunteers are submitting. So that's photos, that's comments, that's the actual sighting itself, first arrival of a hummingbird, for example. Again, it's a way to let people know that what they're doing is important to us, and it's also available for everybody else to see. We have an acknowledgement where we're asked researchers, as well as anybody else using any of our assets, to acknowledge our volunteers and their efforts. And in any report, we acknowledge, usually using the first name of our volunteers on this data that they submit, so or photo or just a comment or the data citing itself. Lastly, I'll just mention this, and this was the topic of my lightning talk, is that we use a data verification method. So data quality is really important to Journey North. We have clearly defined verification methods, and we actually have a person behind the scenes that is looking at each report that comes in. So we take data quality very seriously. So it's both the supporting of the volunteers and then looking at the data submitted that's important. And then as part of the data stewardship, we want the data that our volunteers have submitted to be accessible to as many people as possible, researchers included. So we have created and published data sets now with a central environmental ecological data repository that meet FAIR principles. So they're findable, accessible, interoperable, and reusable. So this is part of that return of results that's so important. We want our volunteers to feel that what they're contributing is of value to us, And we want to make sure that the data they contribute is used for conservation and land management decision making. So I don't know how I did on my time. Ian, I'm hoping.
A little over, but that's fantastic.
Sorry.
I really enjoyed that. Thank you very much, Nancy. All right, so let's move along to Eric. The question for you, digital tools and data-driven methods can open up opportunities for all of us to connect with myriad topics of information and media types. How do you ensure that digital media collections accurately represent the creators of the included materials and serve the needs of the communities accessing them?
Thank you, Ian. Let me share my very messy screen here. I appreciate this question, and the more I thought about it, the more I really thought it's a question that you don't just answer in a singular way. It's a question that you have to answer over and over again with every project you take on. And so I wanted to use my time to share some of the recent work that I've been doing with my colleagues at the Wisconsin Center for Film and Theater Research that's very engaged with data communities and attempts to diversify the heritage archives and collections to be more representative than they've been before. So the collection I'm talking about is the Wisconsin Center for Film and Theater Research. My friend's grandpappy used to say that in life you need a three-legged stool to get you through, and his was coffee, smokes, and drinks. The man lived to be 97 years old, go figure. But the WCFDR's three-legged stool is that we collect in film, broadcasting, and theater, mostly US and English language collections. But then if you drill down to the actual materials that we collect, we have audiovisual media, so film, tapes, as well as born digital media files. We have manuscripts, so letters, contracts, scripts, emails, other unpublished work. And then we have lots of published and promotional materials. I took over as WCFTR director roughly 2 years ago. And one of the first things I wanted to do was to better understand our collections and better understand who was being represented and who wasn't. And so this became one of the ways that we applied data was by collecting and analyzing our own data. So this was a diversity audit that we took at the end of 2020, a snapshot of the demographics of the Wisconsin Center for Film and Theater Research's collections. And as you can see, the collections are overwhelmingly collections from white men. 13% come from white women. There's some married collections, so there's representation of women in some of these joint collections, successful screenwriting teams in particular, but very few collections from media creators of color. So at the time that I became WCFTR director, there were only 2 collections from African-American donors. And this is out of an archive that has roughly 300 collections total, if you look at all the organizations. And it was really important to me that we address this so that we could do better, because as the WCFTR, as a heritage institution, we're not at all unique in having these huge representational gaps. But it is uniquely our challenge to address. And so in the rest of the time here, I just want to talk about some of the ways that we've been doing that and how it relates to communities. So the strategies for enhancing the diversity of our collections have included investing our resources into digitizing, curating, and sharing the collections of women and people of color that we already have. I mean, we have amazing collections at the WCFTR, but in other words, let's make sure we're putting our resources into really elevating and amplifying those voices that have been underrepresented. In new acquisitions, we're prioritizing collections from women and people of color. And this third point, collaborating with a diverse network of archivists, media creators, scholars, and graduate students. And I think a lot of organizations and institutions have found this to be the case too. In other words, you need to build new relationships. If your old relationships keep replicating the same patterns and omissions, then you need to start broadening the groups of folks that you're working with. So Last year, we took in an acquisition that was really exciting and that we've already been sharing with campus and the Hmong community, a Hmong language VHS collection. Last year, we also took in a new collection of African-American film posters and press books from the 1970s, a collection that I was really excited about. And in fact, you can already find some of those digitized and online at mediahistoryproject.org, Media History Digital Library. The main question or collection I want to focus on with the remainder of my time is the Hartford Smith Jr. collection. And here you can see a picture of Mr. Smith. This is him in 1968 on the open reel tape deck, recording his radio program. So Mr. Hartford Smith Jr. was one of the very few producers and hosts of an educational radio program that was distributed nationally in the 1960s. So this is before NPR. This is the pre-NPR public media. And what Mr. Smith worked on, and you see him working on it in this barbershop in Detroit, where he's going around interviewing folks, was just this remarkable series called Seeds of Discontent. It's a 26-part sound documentary that's exploring the urban conditions of Detroit. And he's talking with lots of different community members. He's talking with incarcerated young Black men. He's talking with folks living in Detroit projects. He's talking with folks living in the Detroit suburbs. He's talking to them in the aftermath of the uprisings and riots in Detroit. And he's recording all of this. Through a series of connections, we got in touch with Mr. Smith and his family, because he had not only the completed documentary series, but he had all this other tape. So in other words, you know, the tape that he's recording on this day in that barbershop, we have the raw uncut tape. And it started a really wonderful collaboration. So last summer, my friend and co-PI on a number of projects, Stephanie Sapienza, who's based at University of Maryland, she went out to Detroit to visit the Smith family. While she was there, she was able to take in and pack up the materials, the tape and papers, and then drove them around Lake Michigan to us here in Madison. And then, yeah, you can see the drop off that happened in July. It was really important to the Smith family that we get this digitized right away, and so we did. And this is a really, to me, eye-opening part of the process, was the deed of gift stage. So in taking in any archival collection, we have a deed of gift, and this is our standard boilerplate template that has this phrasing, as you'll see. It's, you know, to be maintained and held by the University of Wisconsin system for the purpose of making these same materials available to scholars and for the pursuit of an active program of research under the direction of the Wisconsin Center for Film and Theater Research. And Mr. Smith didn't like that phrasing, and I don't blame him, because it is, you know, it's kind of elitist, right? Like making these available for scholars and for the pursuit of an active program of research under the direction. And so he said, no, I want this available to everyone. And he also said, I want you to digitize it. And so we put together a new deed of gift, and I highlighted 2 sections from it. So the new phrasing that Mr. Smith's attorney and Mr. Smith agreed to, and also UW Legal was happy with, is that it's going to be maintained for the purpose of making these same materials available to any member of the public interested in the historical events and issues covered in the series, with access provided by the Wisconsin Center for Film and Theater Research. We're providing access, not monitoring only scholars under our direction. And then we also put in this provision that would make it clear for us to share the materials online. So for the purposes of clarity, I, Hartford Smith Jr., own and retain the underlying intellectual property rights to the material described in the annexed inventory. I hereby grant the Wisconsin Center for Film and Theater Research and Board of Regents of the University of Wisconsin the non-exclusive rights in perpetuity to freely share digitized versions of the above mentioned materials online. So we use this as the opportunity, in other words, to go ahead and put into writing the way in which the Smith family would be comfortable having these shared. We don't have the exclusive rights. They could post it elsewhere too, but we have this non-exclusive right. And I'm especially happy to use this occasion to announce that just a couple of weeks ago, we put all the materials online. So we took in all those papers and tapes in July, and in the fall, we scanned them all, both the tape and the paper. And now you can find them on the Internet Archive at the WCFTR's Internet Archive page. And then in the coming months this summer, I'm going to be working with a couple of graduate student project assistants to develop it into more of an online exhibit, an experience that has context. And we're going to be working with the Smith family on this too. So I share this project because for me, it's been a really meaningful one. Again, for me, it's evidence that you do have to rework and approach each one of these projects anew and really be willing to listen to the communities you're working with. And exciting things can come. Like we took an old boilerplate deed of gift and we created something that I think is far better. All right, and with that, I will stop my screen share. Thank you.
Fantastic, thank you, Eric. Okay, next up, Kaiping. Your research reveals textual and visual manipulation of data on social media, which can influence public discourse. What are some examples of this that you've seen, their impact on communities, and what are possible interventions?
Yeah, thank you so much, Ian. Let me share my screen. Yeah, thank you so much. This is a really excellent question. And the thing I want to share today is talking about the theme of empowerment and exclusion of community voices on social media. And I especially want to talk about our computational communication approach, which allows me to examine public discourse on science and environmental issues. So there are three key messages I want to share today. So the first message is social media can empower communities' voices through digital activism for policy changes. And I'm going to show you one example from my work. And the second message I want to share is social media can also exclude and manipulate community voices. And I'm going to show you evidence of lack of diversity in who shares knowledge about science issues on social media. And the second point is the emotional and visual manipulation in COVID-19 misinformation messages. And the third thing is the rise of identity politics beyond data community borders. So these are the three kind of piece evidence I want to show about for us to think about what are some of the ways, digital technology might exclude and manipulate voices from certain communities. And the final point is about intervention, the question Ian asked. So I want to kind of throw out a message here is the key to strengthen about the digital literacy we talk about all the time is actually we need to start in cultivating offline deliberation skills, into our daily habits. And I'm going to show you one design about a deliberative dialogue, which can empower vulnerable community voices through letting them discussing and using their local data. And by data, by local data, what I'm going to show you is it includes indigenous knowledge, included cultures, included evidence which the community developed by themselves. So here are the three messages. So let's first look at the first things about how social media might empower people to voice out their digital activism. So this is a graph where me and my team, we look into public discussion about the climate change, particularly surrounding the climate strike movement from 2018 to 2021 on 5 million tweets. So this is where in this graph, we try to understand is what are the things the public discuss on Twitter when they try to advocate for climate change policies. So here are the four panels where on the y-axis, it represents the proportion of each topic. And the lines, you see the blue and orange lines here, it is a theme of what people talk about climate change. And the vertical line in each of the graph represents a social movement, such as the Greta school strike, the global climate movement, COVID-19 quarantine, and the 2020 US election. So what we see here is, from each of the panel here, what we see is during those social movement time, there is a burst of public discussion regarding talking about climate justice issue. And the public on Twitter, they ask for policy changes, and they discuss a lot about calling for government, industry to take actions to be responsible for addressing the climate issues. And there is also a lot of discussion about the youth community who will take the responsibility to push for the future of climate. So this is where like a figure which I want to demonstrate that social media indeed give a lot of the voices, particularly in this climate strike movement. It's the youth community to call for policy and political action changes, especially around those policy windows. So the next couple of evidences I'm going to show you is about how social media might exclude and manipulate community voices around these three key things. So the first is about the diversity in who shares knowledge. So this is where I study many tens of thousands of YouTube videos where people share talking about science and environmental issues. And what I do is I look at in those videos, the video descriptions, who are cited, which YouTubers are cited in these videos, and I particularly look into not only the pattern of who are being heard more on YouTube, but also look into their profile in terms of gender, race, ethnicity, and whether they are from their institutional organization or from individual YouTubers. So the graph I'm going to show you is a pattern which I pointed out in the paper called segregated inclusion of knowledge sharing on YouTube. So on this graph, this is a network about who mention who on YouTube when they talk about science and environmental issues. So the dots in the graph represents those people. They are being cited a lot, mentioned a lot by other YouTubers. And those smaller dots represent those people they are mentioned very few times by other YouTubers. So the first pattern we see here is in the center, there are few channels such as PBS, Kids for Parents, PBS, the Ideal channel. Those channels, they are the bigger player being always talked about on this digital space when it comes to science and environment. So these are the bigger dots. But the majority of the YouTubers, they are actually on the peripheral of this network, which means that, yes, they express their voices, views on YouTube, but they are actually not being cited a lot by the communities. And then I zoom in to look into, okay, who are those individuals in the center of this network compared to the people in the peripheral? I look into their profile of who they are. And what I found that the more centered you come to this picture, to the network, these are the YouTubers who tended to be male and who tended also to be white skin color. And sometimes they don't even present their skin color on their YouTube picture. And also they tend to be mainstream media instead of individuals. So this is where, the thing which we think about, in the offline space, there are a lot of research talking about the inequality in science communication. And what about the social media? What we see it seems to create or replicate the pattern of offline inequality in knowledge sharing, and where certain community voices are being cited, discussed more compared to the majority of the rest. And then this is the next two figures I'm going to show you is where I look into the YouTube video, again on YouTube channel, where I look into many of the COVID-19 conspiracy videos, especially after the pandemic in 2020 in May. And what me and my collaborator, we ask about is how do those conspiracy videos, how do they manipulate visuals? How do they manipulate the narratives, particularly emotions, compared to other videos who debunk COVID-19 conspiracy? So we compare, propagating conspiracy video versus debunking videos. So here is, when I look into the visual, I particularly focus on the use of color, because this is something which has been shown a lot in persuasion, that color can influence people's perspective attitude a lot. So what I found is conspiracy videos, when they talk about pandemic or other 5G conspiracy, the Bill Gates population control, they tended to use lower color variances and brightness. So a typical example is the picture on the top, which is a conspiracy video. And then the debunking video, they tended to use more color variances and much more brightness pictures. This is especially true if we look into the thumbnails and the early few seconds of the videos. So this is just a statistical table which shows that in terms of different color, different color indexes like the use of brightness, the use of red, blue, and green, and contrast, we see that debunking video, they tended to be much more colorful, use much more bright, much more variances compared to the conspiracy video. So this is where the key message is for citizens. If we want to think about, think about prevent yourself, protect yourself from conspiracy videos, color is one way for you to think about. This is the data entry point to prevent ourselves against these videos. And I also look into all the transcripts of those YouTube videos about conspiracy in terms of propagating and debunking. And I particularly care a lot about the use of emotional language. So this is a figure where the red bar represents conspiracy videos and the blue bar represents debunking videos. And then on the x-axis is different types of emotion used in the video transcript. And the y-axis represents the number of times these emotional words are used. And what we see here very interesting is conspiracy videos, which is the red bar, they used many more, all variety of different types of emotion, whether it's anger or it could be joy, trust, surprise, compared to the debunking videos. So this is where we see that how, those conspiracy videos, they try to arouse people's variety of type of emotion in order to, change people's attitude. So this is about some of the textual and visual manipulation we see in the misinformation messages. And the third thing I want to show you regarding the exclusion, inclusion, of social media is where I emphasize a lot when we think about data and communities, we need to put it into the context into mind. Particularly for me, I care a lot in my work about the social political context that can moderate the relationship between data and the communities. So this is a picture where I look into the social media platform in China called Weibo. So this is the kind of the Chinese Twitter platform. And we're looking to, from the period from January to April 2020, this is where the pandemic started, outbreak, the first phase in China. And we're looking to all the posts that propagate conspiracy and debunk conspiracy, especially talking about who invented the coronavirus, whether it's the United States or the Chinese lab. And what we find here in this figure, the top figure is the volume of conspiracy posts versus debunking posts. And the conspiracy is in red and debunking is in green. And the bottom figure are the number of posts that attribute responsibility to China, which is the green line, and attribute responsibility to US, which is the blue line. And then what we see here is there are bursts of conspiracy posts, also bursts about posts that attribute responsibility to the United States over this 4 months period. And then we look into what happened in the bigger political social background around those bursting moments. And here is what we see, that these are the time where there is a political tension between the US and China, such as the former president called the China virus, the Wuhan virus, and the political tension where the Trump tweeted about the green card ban and also the 5G clean pass on Huawei. So this is where there is not a causal relationship between the volume and these political events. But what I want to show here is where we want to understand about how people discuss about these key issues. We need to think about what is happening in the bigger background, particularly regarding the relationship, the trust between different country actors. So then, what could be some of the possible intervention in my work? I look into to try to increase communities' awareness and the voices in deciding to increase their digital literacy to increase their informedness. So one kind of the intervention I have done, in my research is what we call a deliberative dialogue intervention. So here is one example about an intervention called deliberative poll. And the deliberative poll, this is an example where it was conducted for 2 days. It brought citizens, a group of citizens from Tamale, Ghana, to talk about how can they cultivate, how can they develop sustainable agriculture, how can they, try to fight the public health issues. So this is where they brought people for a 2 days discussion, in small group discussion, moderated discussion to talk about what is the best solution for Tamale's future to fight these public health and environment agricultural problems. And what is special about this design deliberative poll is about 4 things. So in this kind of design, when they choose who are the people to brought to have discussion, they use very scientifically, random sampling method to make sure that the sample who come to discuss this issue is representative of the whole population in the Tamale metropolitan area. So good sample is the foundation in order to get the good data. And then, and also in many of the small group discussion, it's moderated by facilitator who will make sure that in these citizen, discussions, everybody's voice can be heard equally. And they also provide citizens balanced information material to show them here are the pros and cons of each policy issues you will discuss in the next 2 days. And also many times when it comes to the local culture, the discussion style, they often tailor to the local cultures. For instance, when I look at the transcripts of those discussions, they will call each other brothers and sisters, and they will use a lot of the local dialect to talk about these community development issues. And then what I do in this project is I look into the 2-day discussion transcripts to see how do people talk about, how do people use their local knowledge to decide what is the best for their community's future. And the key messages here is under this kind of good design, we see that those population who come to our discussion, they actually 30% of them are illiterate, and many of them have very limited education and living resources. But when you look into how they talk about these community development issues, 54% of all the dialogues they have, they actually use facts. And by facts, what I mean is those local knowledge about how they practice agriculture, how they deal with, public health and food nutrition resources. And also many of the discussion actually raise assumptions and the conditions for each proposal to work. So this is a very inspiring message here, because what we see is under this type of very good design, citizens, no matter which background you come from, they can actually be empowered to have very thoughtful discussion about what is the best solution for their future. And also in this case, many people say citizen discussion, it's just a talk. It doesn't influence public policy making. But in this case, where 2 years later, when we do follow-up research to ask the government officials in the Tamale how they utilize public discussion from deliberative poll, and actually many of the citizen discussions result turned into budget, turned into policy outcome. So this is where, one of the type of many of the interventions where how you can empower the community through this type of very well designed deliberative dialogues. So here are the things I would love to share. Thank you.
Great, thank you, Kaiping. Our last panelist now, Aaron Brower. You have contributed to developing competency-based education programs like the UW Flexible option. How is this approach and other approaches that focus on student learning outcomes versus student seat time in a class different from traditional higher education models? What is its impact on student learning, and what role does data play in supporting competency-based education and those other innovative educational formats?
Thanks. Thanks, Ian. Actually, I don't have a presentation, but I want to actually change up my talk a little bit anyway. I just heard 3 really fascinating presentations, and I kind of want to pull out a few themes that I can also highlight in the work that we do. That then I wonder if we could talk more about. One of them from Nancy has to do with the fact that this community that you build in citizen science is based on a real project. It's not made up. It's not a manufactured problem or project. It's a real one, and people then engage in it in genuine and authentic ways. Eric talked about how to make sure that collections, kind of history, artifacts, represent the actual population, and in particular, maybe the hard work. You were describing the extra thought that went into the legal agreement, for example, and it struck me that if you hadn't been thinking or if the owner of that collection hadn't been thinking in different ways about access, you might not have changed that standard language. And so how much we maybe automatically do the same old thing that just perpetuates the same kinds of limitations to access. So anyway, how to make sure we keep doing the work to kind of push a vision of the future forward. And then Kaiping, first of all, I got to say the bubble and influence graph was just fascinating. And I wrote a question asking whether, and I hope to God this is true, that the bubbles in the center are more accurate and use facts rather than the bubbles in the center are less so. But anyway, that's separate. But what struck me was the role that these new technologies are playing that are significantly different than other kinds of technologies through the ages, right? Radio or TV or whatever. And so those are three themes that just came out for me. What I do at Extended Campus is run, as I said, online educational programs for adults and professionals. These are partnership programs, so we work with all of the UWs. We have 32 programs right now, degree programs, master's programs, bachelor's programs, and also non-credit certificate programs. And the way they work more or less is we will identify a program. So the newest one that we're going to do is digital marketing, and that'll be a certificate. And we base it on a really careful and unbiased analysis of where are their real needs in the workforce. Then we invite campus partners to participate. We develop the curriculum together, and then we support that on our platforms. To kind of pull out some of the themes that I was mentioning, our programs are, including the competency-based ones, these are project-based. So it's less so, it's trying to take advantage of the medium in a different way than we might teach face-to-face. And Eric, I suspect you could say this in a much more compelling way to me, but like when TV first came out, it was basically taping stage productions. It wasn't until later that people kind of realized what TV could actually do different from other mediums that preceded it. And same thing with online learning. There are some things that we can do that you just can't do in a face-to-face environment. And so we're trying to take advantage of that as best as possible. Project-based is one, self-paced is another, trying to create an educational environment that's outcome-based rather than input-based, trying to make it flexible around the students who are working adults. And so they've got busy lives, and the expectation that they can kind of drop everything for education is just not reasonable. So how do you build around their life rather than the other way around? We provide proactive and wraparound student support. It's called intrusive advising. Some of you may be familiar with the term, but those things are super important to helping students succeed through these programs. even the way in which we price the programs, we use subscription models. So it's a little bit, not exactly like an Amazon Prime model of pricing these programs rather than paying by credit. We're kind of in between those. So we offer a couple different options. But we have, as I said, 32 programs. We've got 5,300 students right now who are going through this. Our graduation rates are great. Our retention rates are double the national average. And it's because of these well-crafted kind of fully student-centered programs. Just one last thing and I'll be done. What we try hard to do is aim our education at a vision of the future of higher education that we really believe in. One that's, our students already do this. So we're kind of leaning into this approach that we view already happening with our students. Students sample quite a lot from education these days. Only less than 25% of all students now graduate from the institution in which they started. So fully 3/4 of students are kind of coming in and out of education. And that's pretty normal. And if you think about how we learn, you know, if you're trying to fix something, the first place I go to is YouTube and try and see if someone's done a video. That helps me do that. And that's really kind of how people are learning these days. So trying to sample from a whole variety of sources. Trying to understand whether people actually learned something from those videos and is the quality of those videos any good? Those are the challenges that we face. And so we work hard to produce high quality stuff and then have rubrics for evaluation and the rest of it. But the model is one where students are going to be creating their own education and training pathways throughout their whole life and mixing and matching between credit and non-credit, trying to take things they've done for credit and apply it to workforce real problems kind of in the same way citizen science works, and vice versa. They've got workforce training, and how do you build that into more formal educational programming? And then how do you keep track of all of this throughout their life? And the words these days are comprehensive learner record, but you probably heard the term through e-portfolios or other kinds of products. And there's a whole lot of kind of ownership issues related to these comprehensive learner records having to do with, you know, are these transcripts owned by the institution that you graduate from, or are they owned by the student? And in our view, they should be owned by the student, but you got to then figure out validation and how does that work? And there's some interesting technology related there. Some of the issues that are just outstanding for us, I mean, not solved is what I mean. Access is continually an issue that we're trying to deal with. Rural parts of the state, rural parts of the country don't have access to high-speed internet in ways that is necessary for the cool stuff we do to work. So how do we work that out? And there's public policy issues there as well as just economic issues. Making sure technology works. So, you know, again, as I mentioned, you want to not think about it. You want to just be able to kind of access the materials, have the interactions with the people that you're dealing with, all of that being seamless. And the third thing is pushing the experience, continually pushing the experience and quality. So virtual reality is sort of a new thing in my field, and it's a little bit out there actually at this point, but even more pedestrian are things, again, like creating these comprehensive learner records that really are safe and secure, but the ownership stays where it should be owned. And this is an area that where there's a lot of work to be done. So I'll stop there. I probably got about 15 minutes here, but I really appreciate the presentations from the other panelists too. Just really fascinating stuff. So thanks for that chance.
Fantastic. Thank you, Aaron. I want to echo your sentiments too. Lots of great thoughts there. Those are very good answers to those questions. So we're going to end the recording of the session here and transition to the more open Q&A.